Australian dream of home ownership has turned into a nightmare of debt. Low interest rates and soaring house prices have meant household debt is now $2 trillion. But the era of cheap debt is coming to an end. Interest rates are likely to rise.
The cost of living right now is going up. Groceries that 2 years ago would cost me around $100 a week and now around $140 to $150 a week. I wasn't getting nervous about it until I saw the price of fuel go up. We have a mortgage. I'm nervous about interest rates going up. I actually make a point at the beginning of the month to watch when the Reserve Bank were going to make their announcements. With the cost of living going up, we're now looking at the sports that we love to support the kids doing and second guessing whether we do them anymore. They love to do swimming, and right now I'm looking at, well, they can swim good enough, right? So should they still continue doing swimming lessons?
Mother of two, Serena Ryan, says even a small interest rate rise will hurt her finances, especially since she's currently renovating.
I feel like that's my safety blanket, is actually being spent on the renovation. It makes me nervous. I know how important that is to have a safety blanket when interest rates go up. We'll have to adjust our budget. It's not an if or a but. I'm doing my best now to put money away to make sure I can cover it, but that also means with the cost of food going up and fuel going up, that ability to put money away has evaporated quite quickly. I think the reality now is that it's not possible for people to get into the housing market without taking on huge amounts of debt.
Welcome to another episode of Adding Up the podcast.
I started my podcast about my lived experience with debt. I've had multiple credit cards. I have had bad experiences with it. I've bought property and I've sold property and I've made a loss. I think debt has got a lot to answer for. The ability of ease of which we could attain property. I think people need to understand what comes with getting the property, and I hope by speaking out that'll help more people.
When it comes to household debt, Australia is world champion, beaten only by Switzerland. The last time interest rates started rising seriously in 2002, the average Australian mortgage was less than 5 times the average annual wage. Now it's 7 times. And in New South Wales, 9 times. So if we're all in so much debt, why is the Reserve Bank contemplating lifting interest rates? Well, it's all about balancing the economy. As rates go down, debt gets cheaper, meaning people borrow more and the economy grows. But so does inflation. When rates rise, the economy slows down, putting a handbrake on inflation, which is exactly what the Reserve Bank must now consider. What impact on all this does the amount of household debt we've got in Australia have?
It's huge, right? It's the huge risk. Our reliance on housing, on particular on housing wealth and our, attachment to that over the last couple of decades certainly underpinned economic growth, but it means household debt is a huge problem and one of the highest in the OECD. It means, for the Reserve Bank, their ability to increase rates to control inflation has to be tempered, again, with that household debt, because if they overcorrect, things could go south pretty quickly for a lot of families.
Gareth, you're now the earliest in terms of the prediction of when rates are going to start rising in June. Why is that?
Well, we think the next CPI is going to be very strong, a lot stronger than the Reserve Bank has forecast. We think the underlying rate will be up around 4.5%. So on that basis, we don't think the Reserve Bank would need to wait to see any more inflation data to conclude that inflation pressures are genuinely here.
And how high do you think interest rates will go?
The household sector in Australia carries a lot of debt, and the Reserve Bank, we think, is going to get a lot of mileage out of rates going up. So we think they'll raise interest rates steadily through this year into the early part of next year. And then we have them pausing at 1.25%.
CommBank's head of Australian economics, Gareth Aird, has been watching the RBA change its tune.
I mean, we go back 12 months and the Reserve Bank was saying they didn't think they'd be raising interest rates until 2024 at the earliest. The Reserve Bank is now saying that a rate rise in 2022 is plausible. So they have changed their language quite a bit in a short amount of time. And we're expecting them to change their language again, where a rate hike in 2022 doesn't become plausible, it becomes probable.
There's certainly a plausible scenario that rates go up later this year, but it's, there are a lot of other scenarios as well. When we look at the data, most households are paying off more than is required by the current level of interest rates. There's a lot of capacity for many borrowers to keep their current level of spending even with higher interest rates because they've built up these buffers.
Clearly interest rates are going to have to rise. The question for them is, do you go early and slower and steadier, or do you wait with the risk of having to go much faster? I'd be starting earlier so that you can go slower. That'll have less impact on the economy and less of a risk of inducing a recession. If we get into a situation, for example, where the US Fed is in at the moment where they're looking now down at inflation hitting 10%, they're going to have to go faster and they're going to therefore risk going too far, overcorrecting and having a recession.
I've always had to watch my pennies because I had to bring up 2 children on my own. So I'm used to it. Rent seems to be pretty high, but I've never been in a position to be able to buy anything. The main part of what I have to watch is having enough money for my rent. If it's really cold in the winter, I very rarely use the heater. Instead, I'll put more clothes on or put a blanket over me. I pick and choose where I buy clothes from, and usually I wait until sale time. If I didn't watch what I was spending, I wouldn't be able to go out and socialise, and I like to get out and about and meet friends. You can use public transport, especially with the pensioner gold pass. You can go anywhere for $2.50.
Grandmother Mary Ross is relying on her super to get by. But like many other retirees, years of low interest rates has hurt her savings.
With the super, I have to draw down every 2 weeks because you have to draw down the minimum each year, and that supplements my pension, because if I didn't draw down, I'd only have $79 a week to live on and to pay expenses, etc. But I've noticed just over the last few months that the interest hasn't been very good on the super.
For retirees, a rate hike would be a pay rise.
Yes, I love to take my grandchildren out, but it's a little bit too expensive, for instance, going out for lunch or for dinner. If the interest rates did go up, which would improve my savings, I would be able to take my grandchildren out for visits or even take them away on a holiday with me, which would be absolutely lovely.
I'm forecasting before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, interest rates I expected to go up at least twice between now and the end of the year.
With the first one when?
Probably in the middle of the year. Depends very much on what happens to the recorded inflation. But Ukraine and Russia have totally changed the game.
So you reckon normal interest rate would be 3%?
Right now,
are we heading for 3% cash rate?
I think we probably will be over a number of years. I'm talking about what happens in the economy when everything is stabilised. Right now, we've got shocks coming from COVID, we've got shocks coming from increased uncertainty and risk in the world economy, from China, from Russia, we've got energy price shocks. So right now, there is no stable interest rate.
Nobody knows what the hell's going on. Nobody knows whether Arthur or Martha.
And that's why this is extremely dangerous for long-term growth prospects, because if people don't know what returns they're going to get in real terms, they're not going to invest.
We're obviously having a pre-election budget during a period of potentially rising interest rates. Does that make it more kind of dangerous?
We know that governments like to spend up money in an election period so that people vote for them. It's a pretty simple metric, and they've got the Treasury purse strings, so why not use them? But in this environment, there does need to be great care, because adding to demand at this point is just going to add to inflationary pressures. That means the Reserve Bank will have to go faster and harder in terms of interest rates, risking that recession. That's not to say that they shouldn't necessarily be supporting some families who are really doing it tough, but it needs to be very targeted and very careful. I think the time for sort of widespread fiscal spending without considering the consequences is very much over.
The question confronting the Reserve Bank is not so much when to start raising interest rates, but when to stop. With an unprecedented amount of debt and inflation on the rise, what is the new normal for interest rates? It's going to be a guess. Let's hope they guess right.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 730's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.